Welcome to the Sooners 360 Recruiting Podcast, a podcast for OU recruiting fans by Sooners 360. Each week we catch you up on the latest OU recruiting news and provide opinions and evaluations on all things OU football recruiting. I'm Chris Mason, lead recruiting analyst for Sooners 360. This podcast is now sponsored by Sooners 360 on Patreon. To support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/Sooners360817 and click subscribe. It's only $2 a month, and there's also a free trial option. The link will also be in the show notes. Also, this podcast is now part of the Believe podcast family. Every team, every topic, everywhere. I'm also appearing on the Horns Down podcast YouTube channel with Chris with a K and Jason Watkins from Hall of Fame podcast, discussing OU season and OU events. So keep an eye out for those live streams and podcasts every week, every 10 days. So this is episode 114, Navy action in San Antonio. And we're going to jump to the recruiting news. So first off, there's no commits, no decommits, nothing along those lines. And also, there's a smattering of guys still entering. I'm not quite sure exactly how. And obviously, Monday night is the championship game. I'm recording this late Friday night, early Saturday morning. So in a couple of days here in Atlanta will be the championship game. And obviously, those players do have an opportunity to enter the portal after their game. But I'm not imagining to see a large amount of Ohio State or Notre Dame players enter. I guess it's possible that someone enters that OU's interested in, but not anticipating that. So it looks like OU's portal activity for January is closed, and OU will re-engage in the portal post-spring depending upon what their needs are. And I would think the three obvious areas would be cornerback, depending upon how the young kids on the roster play, wide receiver, depending upon how all the additions and the injury returns and all that is intermingling and working. And then linebacker, defensive tackle, if they need some depth pieces and can find the right guys. So I would imagine that's what we'll see post-spring, but it could depend also on what OU loses. I think we could see, and I'm not going to name names because that's not really productive. Guys will hit the portal if they want to hit the portal. But I would imagine it's a possibility that we could see 8 to 10 guys leaving OU who feel like they're kind of buried in the depth chart once with the addition of the transfer players and the 15 early enrollees that are now on campus. And those 15 players are everyone in the recruiting class except for C.J. Nixon, who's at Weatherford trying to win a basketball championship. Then I think OU has run into a numbers issue, scholarship issue, balance issue, and that's why Trinae Washington and Marcus James from Carl Albert will be enrolling late. But we'll have to just see how things shake out with all that. But that appears to be what's going on. There's the photo that's been going around of all the newcomers that has made its way on social media, and Stoops Bros, as he usually does, has identified everybody. So folks are wondering why Darius Afalava and Michael Fasusi were missing, and that's because they are in Hawaii at the Polynesian game, which we'll talk about a little bit. So the biggest topic of the week since our last podcast is the Navy game. OU had 2 players in the Navy game. The first was obviously Ryan Foji, who started the week at tackle, looked really good, was really the only guy really giving, he looked really good. He was handling all of the defensive ends, rush ends, and drills, and looked fantastic. And then due to injuries and I guess over inviting tackles and not having enough guards, they asked Ryan to move inside, and he did that. And obviously, I think he struggled at guard. He's a 6'5", 295-pound guy, long wingspan. He's always been a tackle. That's always been his position. But he gave guard a shot. And from all reports from various pods and social media stuff. He did an okay job. And then in the game itself, he ended up playing center because of an injury. And I don't think, based upon I've watched his high school footage. I've never seen him play center before. So from that perspective, Ryan did a good job. He's not going to be one of the top 10 guys coming out of the game on those lists because, he's just not playing the position he knows how to play. But he looks fantastic. He's heading to Norman. He was in the Norman photos this week that were posted. So, good week for Ryan Foji. Tristan Haynes looked good at cornerback in his playing, in his reps. Did a good job. He's just still, you can just tell by the footage, he's still light. He's 6'2", long frame, and he's, 170 pounds maybe. So he needs to put on good weight. And he's enrolling, he's on campus. So he could put on some good weight between now and spring and then put on, just let weight, just continue putting on good weight over the summer. And in the fall, he could be a factor. He certainly has the speed and athleticism and length to be a factor at cornerback if OU is going deep down the roster looking for players to help. So we'll see, but positive for both guys. Other OU targets, and I'm going to talk about 2026 guys here. Felix Ojo is one of the aforementioned tackles they invited, and he looks good. He looks great. He looks like he's trending to be like Ryan Foji, sort of a top 100 guy now, a year, before his senior season starts and the summer starts and all the camp drills. But I think there's a good chance Felix Ojo could be a top 5 national tackle and pushing for like 5-star territory. We'll see, but that's kind of where he's trending. It's not a great year for tackles based upon who's OU's offered and the footage I've looked at. I'll talk about one of the best ones a little bit later. But overall, it's not as tackle loaded this year as last year, I believe. Then Davion Gross, who I've talked about a number of times from Frisco Lone Star. He was at the Navy game. He's playing running back and playing wide receiver. He's just a 6'2", 200-pound, super athletic prospect. He wants to play. He was very clear in interviews he wants to play wide receiver. I think OU would be fine with him doing that, and also would probably get him the ball some of the ways just because he's that good a playmaker. OU's definitely in that mix somewhere. It just depends upon sort of how things shake out. But they offered him a little bit late, but I think they've made up that difference and are in a good place with Davion. And then the other news was the defensive lineman from Vegas, James Tank Carrington. I kind of thought he was, and based upon some stuff posted, he was like 6'3", 270. And when I saw him next to Bates when he visited for, I believe it was a Tennessee game, he looked bigger. But the word out of San Antonio is that he's closer to 6'2", 255, and might actually be more of a defensive end and a defensive tackle. I don't know if that changes OU's approach in recruiting him. If he's got the speed, power, and agility to play defensive end at 6'2", 255, OU will certainly, or 265, something like that, OU will certainly play him and continue recruiting him. But he may not be in the mix for one of the defensive tackle D-line positions, especially at 3 technique, which will be interesting to see how that shakes out. So that's the news from the game. Then another interesting part of this was the Navy All-American Combine, where they invited a bunch of young players, 2027, 2026. I'm not sure. I think there may have been some 2028 guys there, but probably limited to 2026 and 2027. And obviously the sort of superstar show of this game, of the Combine, was that you had, at least for OU fans, and also sort of nationally, to be honest, was you had a number 1 quarterback and national number 1 player, Faison Brandon from North Carolina, who's committed to Tennessee. And then you had Jaden O'Neal from California, the OU commit that OU QB commit. And they both were at the combine and just put on an absolute show, matching each other pass for pass in the drills and just competing against each other and just looked great. So Faison was the number one player in a lot of the top 10 lists from the combine. O'Neal was number 2. O'Neal took home the QB trophy. Brandon took home the overall MVP trophy. Depending who you talk to, the margin between Brandon and O'Neal is razor thin. O'Neal might have actually outthrown him in some regard, a little bit. So that's just blown up O'Neal's status. And obviously, we've got Elite 11 coming up. They're already starting to publish the Elite 11 days. So, Jaden has a chance after his Narbonne junior season kind of getting derailed for things completely out of his control. So Jaden just went to the Navy camp and just looked like $1 million. And obviously coming out of that, and OU obviously having had their somewhat down season, every program's coming out for Jaden O'Neal. OU's going to have a massive fight on their hands holding on to him just because he looked so good. I'd imagine that he's probably going to end up in the 5-star range, depending upon what Elite 11 does. There's a couple other quarterbacks. The battle for number one quarterback in 2026 it's a little bit of a, it depends a little bit upon what service you're talking to. Some guys like Ryder Lyons out of California. Other services are, slightly higher, are going to be higher on Faison. And then there's Jared Curtis, also who's from Florida, who decommitted from UGA and is still kind of out there. He's looking at 6 different schools. UGA is one of those schools. So the quarterback list it's interesting. Like, I'm looking at Rivals right now. I just pulled up Rivals, and Jaden is the number 4 quarterback in the country. Faison is ahead of him. Jared Curtis is ahead of him. Bradley Smeagol, whose name I'm not so familiar with. Then you've got Notre Dame's quarterback Noah Grubbs. And you've got Will Griffin from Florida, who's also a really great-looking prospect. But yeah, so depending upon what service you're talking about, it just depends who they're going to have as sort of the number one quarterback. Let me check On 3 real quick and see what the On 3 guys are saying about who's the best quarterback. Moving to for some reason they haven't switched to 2026, so I got to load. So On 3 has Jaden like his number 17 in the country. 247 has him as number 13. So if we look at quarterbacks and industry rankings, you got Jared Curtis, and then this is where Ryder Lyons comes in. He's on the On 3. He's big on 3. Then you got Diabell, the Texas quarterback, verbal. He's the son of former basketball player Raha Bell. So you got a couple of names ahead. You've got the Oregon. The Oregon has the Illinois quarterback that OU is also looking at. Jaden O'Neal grabbed that verbal before he did. So you've got some names there, but I think by the time Elite 11 is over and everything shakes out, I think it'll be Faison, Jared Curtis, and Jaden O'Neal, probably with Ryder Lyons or Diabell fighting for the top 5 quarterback position. And I think all 5 of those guys will end up being 5 stars. So it's a good quarterback class, and I think Jaden, with this combine, when you just watch him throw the ball, this is a comment I made on Twitter, is that I think Jaden may have the best arm talent in the whole class, and his ability to he's just so smooth throwing the football. It's just he makes it look effortless, if that's possible. So he had a great day, but that does mean everybody in college football has remembered his name and is going to be aggressively coming after him to try and take him away from OU. So, sticking with 2026, a wide receiver who had a great junior year, was sort of flying up some of the recruiting lists, had a great combine, looked fantastic, maybe the best wide receiver at the combine. And his name is Jaden Warren. He's a wide receiver from Texas. He's from Iowa Colony, which is kind of it's kind of confusing from that aspect. It's in Texas, but it's called Iowa Colony. Not quite sure what to do with that, but I'm sure someone in Texas can explain it to me. It's in Rosharon, Texas. I don't think I know where that is. I'm going to have to look that up just to satisfy my close curiosity here. All right, unincorporated Rosharon, Texas is all right. It's looks like it's south of Houston. That's what it's looking like. So not an area OU has traditionally always been great in, but he's mentioned OU in interviews, and he has an OU connection. He had an interview with 247, and they mentioned in that interview, he mentioned that he was, I believe he's related to Kyler Murray. So OU might have to add him to the pool of wide receiver prospects to look at for 2026. Obviously, Texas always full of really good wide receiver prospects. So adding another name to that list is good. And like I said, he's 6'2", 200, 185 pounds. And, he's right now in the top 200 of everybody but rivals. And I think after this camp, he'll bump up those rankings. And it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't show up somewhere in the top 150, maybe as high as top 100. That's how good his junior year film was and how good he looked at this combine. Okay, so another name I've mentioned before is Jalen Brewster, the defensive tackle from the Dallas area. He plays defensive end and running back last year at 6'4", 280 pounds. Making lots of plays, very raw D-line because he's still playing running back. And he's far too good at running back, I think, for his high school not to play him there. But once this kid focuses on defensive line, he's going to get radically better just, in a very short amount of time. He, at the combine, showed up and was measured with 6'4", 300, a little over 300 pounds. And like I said, his explosion and his athleticism at that size is ridiculous. He was wearing OU gloves during his workout based upon a social media video I saw. OU's one of the first schools to offer him, and Todd Bates is deeply ingrained with Mr. Jalen Brewster. Also a name I've talked about this guy before, but it's starting to filter out. I mentioned him on the Patreon site a number of times. So if you're on the Patreon site, I mentioned him on the podcast last week. I said he was from Finland. He's from Sweden. So I screwed that up. But Valdin Sone, a defensive tackle from the NFL Europe program, same program Daniel Akin-Kimmy came through. In fact, Daniel has indicated that he knows Valdin. He played against him and during some of their developmental work. Valdin is sort of blowing up right now at combines and stuff. He's a defensive tackle. I believe he reclassified to 2026, which is not a big surprise for an academically from Europe to America kind of transition, trying to figure out that kind of conversion, because all the European countries do things a little bit differently, and they do it very differently than America does in terms of high school and graduation type stuff. And I won't go into great details on that, but for anybody that's been to Europe or knows someone from Europe, you kind of understand that. It's basically, yeah, I'm going to go into details. I'm going to give you a detail. It's basically, you go to high school until you go to secondary school or high school until you're about 16, and then you take tests and subject matters which you excel at, which determine whether you're going to pursue those interests in college. So Sone has probably come to America and has maybe decided he needed to reclassify from an academic or an age standpoint to be a freshman in college next fall. In fall of 2026. So he's 6'4", 6'5". Someone said he was 320 pounds and just dominating in recent combine activity, just looking great. OU is firmly in there. Todd Bates is, recruiting him. OU has connections with the NFL Europe guys. So he's a name to just keep an eye on coming out of the whole Navy week as well. Lots of schools heavily interested in him. Obviously, a 6'4", 320-pound mobile defensive tackle is going to garner attention from just everybody. So that's really all the Navy content. OU this week made 2 new offers. I love the offers. I'm just not sure if OU is going to be in play for either of them. Trenton Henderson is one of the offers. He's from Pensacola, Florida. He's a top 50 national player in the country. He looks it on film. He's 6'5", 225, off the edge, speed, length, explosion, all of those measurables you want. Stand-up linebacker, hand-in-the-dirt defensive end. He can do it all. He looks fantastic. I would love OU to somehow get involved with him, but the list of folks is going to be deep. And from Florida, obviously, the Gators are rebounding a little bit. Miami's going to be involved, although it's the Panhandle. They tend to be a little more South Florida, but it's still. But he's in the Panhandle, which means Alabama, Georgia, everybody in the SEC, Clemson, everyone's going to be after him. So OU's trying to throw their hat in. I'd love to see him get involved there. He looks like a real difference maker. Then Sincere Johnson, a linebacker. And you know how much I've been pleading for OU to raise their linebacker game, get more linebacker recruits in. So I love the linebacker offer, but he's from Ohio. He's 6'3", 225. I'd imagine he's going to be a top 150 player nationally at the very least. He looks fantastic on film, just everything you would want OU to start reloading the linebacker room with. I don't know if they're going to be able to get a visit. Ohio State, Bama, lots of schools involved there. I'd love for OU to have a linebacker coach and pull this guy in for visit. But there's nothing right now indicating that OU can make a top 10, top 15 for either of these guys right now, or at least it doesn't look that way. The Polynesian Hawaiian games going on, I think, or has finished. OU had 2 guys there, Fasusi and Afalava. Both were at the game. That's why they were missing from some photos and some other activity. Rave reviews for both. Fasusi is getting absolutely rave reviews. They like what they're seeing out of Afalava. Both guys are just. I just want to get them back to Norman and start getting them ready to try and get into the 2 deep for the offensive line. I think it's time for that. A guy I mentioned before, Jake Krull and KJ Ford, were also at the Hawaii game. They both look really good. The only footage I've seen of Jake Krull is he finally has run into a offensive lineman as agile and as athletic, that can counter what he does. I was mentioning he was giving fits to big offensive linemen at the Under Armour game. But at the Polynesian game, he's running into David Sanders, who's someone a year older than him. He's the power forward-looking tackle. The only guy I think probably should be ranked ahead of Fasusi at tackle, clearly. He's going to Tennessee. He's number 5 in the country, 3 in the country, depending on who you talk to. He's 6'6", 280. And he was giving Jake the business a little bit, but he's the only guy I've seen do it so far. And again, he's a year older. Jake's a junior, so if they meet again in the SEC, Jake should be bigger. At 6'3", 230, he's probably should be playing in the college game of 15, 20 pounds heavier, a little savvier, stronger. with some counters. Sanders is just quick enough to counter all of Cruel's moves, and most tackles aren't. So this is sort of a unicorn matchup where Cruel, maybe lost a little bit. But the star of the game for the Poly game looks like it's DeCorian Moore. He's an excellent wide receiver. I think some folks are overblowing the comps in terms of his impact next year at Oregon. He's not Jeremiah Smith. He's very, very good, but he's not 6'3", 225. DeCorian is closer to Evan Stewart's size. He's 5'11", 185, 190. Fast as he'll get out. He'll have a impact at Oregon, but I don't think he's maybe it's Ryan Williams versus Jeremiah Smith, which is still great, but some folks are going maybe a little over the top on DeCorian's potential impact. In terms of target info, Grant Wise is an offensive guard from Florida who's visited OU a number of times. I thought OU was in relatively good shape with him. Looks like maybe OU slipping a couple of that. He's got like a top 12, and looks like OU's in the back half of that. Looks like Clemson, A&M are kind of making a run. He's not talking about coming to a junior day in Norman anytime soon. Of course, he has been to OU 3 or 4 times, so it's one of these things that's going to be hard for me to pick up on right now. Is there's a lot of guys like Felix Ojo who have been to OU 4 or 5 times in 2024. Now it's 2025, and they want to go to some other campuses, see other places, do other things. So while it looks like OU is slipping, it may just simply be a case of, well, this is what OU is. I know everything about OU, and they're a 10 on my scorecard. OU doesn't want me to commit until I can visit other places. So I'm going to go to other places and kind of get up to speed on them and kind of check those boxes and then come back to OU and see where I am. It's a risk, especially when you have a bad season like OU had, but it's also helped OU for the most part stay away from decommits, other than wide receivers for the most part. So Wise is one of those guys. So it's hard for me to tell if OU's slipping or if he's just going to other places, checking other boxes, and will work his way back to OU for like a spring game, or leave OU. OU will make his Final Four, his top 6. We'll get an official visit in the summer, and we'll know a little bit then. So there's a whole group of prospects that sort of fall in this category of OU had good momentum, and then the kids went to finish their football seasons. Now they're getting back into recruiting, and they've not necessarily jumping to go to OU right off the bat, but for some of that is that they've been to Norman several. I mean, if you've been to, Norman 4 times and you've been to 2 games, maybe you want to go to do some other stuff this spring and see other places and check some boxes. So I might say OU's out on a guy and then have to roll back and say, no, they're actually not. And conversely, I may say, well, I thought OU was with this guy, but now that he's gone around the country, OU's fallen off his radar. So just keep an eye on that. For example, a guy I wasn't really tracking that heavily, put OU in his top 12, and it looks like OU's in a good spot, is another offensive lineman, Chancellor Barkley from Florida. Great name. He's 6'4", like 295. He could be a guard, could be a tackle. I think, as I said, that I think OU is, if they can get Felix Ojo, and that's a huge question mark right now, but if they can, that's your left tackle of the future, behind the Fasusi and Foje. So you're building elite depth there. But finding a right tackle might be a little difficult. But I think Barkley fits in a number of prospects that could easily be right tackles if OU gets the guards that they want. And I think Barkley is a name to track, and we'll kind of see where OU is. In terms of current events coming up, so OU's junior day, their first junior day. They're not having a junior day this weekend. A lot of schools are. OU's skipping that. Not sure why. I'm sure they have their reasons. But next weekend, the 25th, is their first junior weekend. And so far, it looks like the names of, I'm going to give you just some names that I've been able to confirm on social media. There's a site, there's some paywall sites that have some lists that people have sent me. I'm not going to take those guys' information until I can, I'll confirm it with the social media stuff I have, and then come up with a better list for you guys next week. But just 4 names to track. The first one is obviously Jaden O'Neal. He's coming back on campus, which is a great sign that he can get on campus, sit down with Ben Arbuckle, go over some film, and get that relationship on terra firma, that just lock it down. And he can be part of the class, start recruiting guys, and start talking to players. So 2 names I've been talking about, Tavion Branch, the defensive tackle from from Pennsylvania, will be there. 6'5", 280, love his film. 3 technique, probably also could play, at 310, 315 kind of range. So just a lot of potential there. And then from Alabama, and that's Todd Bates went to go visit him, and now he's showing up in Norman for an official for a junior day. I followed recruiting long enough to be able to follow those breadcrumbs and say that's a good sign. Same thing with Cam Harrigan Johnson, defensive end from Alabama. Chavis was on campus and now was on his high school campus visiting him. OU offered him. They're making a big push. He's a big, powerful defensive end. Would be a big defensive end in the class to mix with. Hopefully, maybe KJ Ford and Jake Krull. I'll give you just an ideal 3-man defensive end class. Everybody's starting to offer Johnson, so he's unranked. That's not going to last long. Based upon what I see on film, he's a top 250, top 150 kind of kid. Just big, athletic, big frame, just everything you're looking for. But he's going to be on, like I said, he's also going to be on campus. That's a great sign. You offer him, Miguel Chavis visits him, and then you get him on campus as soon as possible. So, not hard to read positive vibes there. We'll see. He'll go to other schools, and we'll see what happens later. But right now, I think it's a pretty good sign. Then we have Caden Hall, the safety I talked about previously. He's confirmed he's coming into town. He's posted that. He said that in interviews. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. He's an ideal Brandon Hall safety, all over the field, playing all over the field. He's a top 200 guy, composite on 3. Thinks he's a borderline 5-star. I like his film. He's very athletic, powerful, just a great looking safety. Just the kind of guys Brandon Hall has been adding. OU will follow up that junior day with the second junior day. And I don't have too many names for this yet because it's so far out. OU is probably trying to push guys for the 25th, and then those that can't come, they're going to push them to the second one. It'll be February 1st. The one name that appears to be locked in right now, and we're locked in pencil, but it's a big name. It's 5-star offensive tackle, Emmanuel Iheanacho from Maryland, 6'7", 340. He's probably the number 1 or 2 tackle in the country, I would say. Maybe number 1. I think Felix Ojo is probably going to end up in the top 5. He looks really good. He's visiting Florida this weekend, so he's getting out and about. I'm not sure where OU's long-term chances are here, but I'd like OU to stay in the fight just because tackles are hard to get, and OU has obviously proven with Michael Fasusi they're willing to pay for tackles, and this guy would be, if you had him in the mix, it's as my co-host Caleb says, 3 tackles are better than 2 tackles, 4 tackles are better than 2 tackles. Just keep adding depth and talent on the offensive line and let things work itself out. So that's the junior day activity. I imagine that OU's junior, the junior population. So Jackson Cantwell, the offensive tackle from Missouri, who looked at OU once and hasn't looked at OU again, is probably the number 1 tackle, and he's probably go to Missouri or Nebraska or Georgia or Oregon. If he could choose one of those and they could pay more attention to him and leave Emmanuel a Henacho out there for OU, that would be just fine by me. He's the number 2 tackle. What does on 3 think? Yeah, on 3 has John Turntine and Cody Green as the next 2. I think Turntine's the Texas guy who is OU's dropped off his list. I think he's a guard. And then I think, right now they have Felix Ojo as the number 18 tackle in the country. I think that's ridiculously low. I think he'll move up much higher than that. And they got there's just a lot of different opinions right now in 2026. Kids, things will balance out a little bit, I think. So, so Amin Haicho, if Henacho, if he comes into campus, it's just a great sign. OU swinging for the fences. There's no downside to it. We've had good luck with Maryland offensive tackles, and can maybe emphasize that to Emmanuel. Finally, OU has set their Future Freaks event for 3/8. That's the 2027, 2028, 2029, even kind of guys. Several guys have already confirmed. Two more guys confirmed last week. David Thomas, he's an in-state wide receiver from Stillwater. He's 5'11", 160 pounds. Really good film for a high school freshman. And then 2027 defensive end, defensive tackle Dwayne Jones from Booker T. Washington confirmed. He plays inside right now. I don't know if he's a defensive end or a D tackle. Time for to figure that out. Time for him to add weight, get bigger. But what you can see is on footage, he and his interior teammate, Joseph Graves, who does have an OU offer, that I've mentioned before, the 2027 defensive tackle from Booker T, 6'4", 290. The two of them are tearing up offenses in the Tulsa area. The two of them are just, I don't know how you handle Jones's quickness, and I don't know how you handle Graves' power. And they're both, like I said, they just finished their sophomore years. So they're about to, they're getting Graves has lots of offers. Jones doesn't have an OU offer yet. I imagine at the Future Freaks event, OU will offer him. He has a bunch of other offers as well. So, it's kind of far out, obviously. Tennessee will be a factor with Booker T kids. They always were, always have been historically. I don't see that really changing. But the Future Freaks event set up. More and more names will get added to that, and I'll just keep track of that and updating the Patreon site with capsule reviews, so you've got some information and links to video to look at them. But I'll also update you guys when I do the next podcast, depending upon the names I hear. So that's all the recruiting news that there is right now. I appreciate everyone for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to the Sooners 360 channel. Don't forget to leave a rating for the podcast and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And again, please visit patreon.com/Sooners360817 to subscribe for more recruiting content and to support this podcast and to keep this podcast free. So thanks, everyone.